Ric Flair's 30 for 30 doesn't tell the whole story, and it's Ric Flair's fault. 13 Thoughts on the big, messy life of one of wrestling's greats. 1. The Ric Flair documentary Nature Boy features a story about Ric Flair surviving a plane crash. The plane was a Cessna 310 headed from Charlotte to Wilmington, N.C., and it overloaded at takeoff with beefy wrestlers and a promoter, David Crockett. The pilot dumped fuel to compensate for all the extra weight and tried to switch to the tanks and the wings, empty fuel tanks, it turns out, and the engine died. The plane fell rapidly, narrowly missed hitting the water tower of a prison, and hit the ground just short of the runway in a stall at around 100 miles per hour. The crash cracked 3 vertebrae in Ric Flair's back. When Flair healed and got out of the hospital, he became Ric Flair, the flamboyant, rhinestone robe-wearing, trash-talking, luxury brand wrestler completely. There is before the crash, when Flair would live as Richard Flairs off camera, and there is after the crash. That's all in the movie. What isn't in the movie? The time he was struck by lightning and lived while another man died, or the time a well past 60 Flair got pantsless on stage at a Myrtle Beach bar and ordered drinks on the house, or the time he went overseas for a tour where he desperately needed the money, but found a bar on arrival and bought drinks for the bar with money he didn't have, or, oh God, the spaghetti incident. The spaghetti incident is not in the movie, and if the spaghetti incident isn't in the movie, well, it has to make you wonder what other lunacy sits on a cutting room floor somewhere. 2. That is not the fault of Nature Boy as a documentary. Like almost everything in the documentary, that is Ric Flair's fault. Ric Flair is at fault for so many things, according to the principal witnesses in Nature Boy. Ric Flair is to blame for losing the money, all of it, every night, to bartenders, to attorneys, to the former governor of North Carolina from whom he bought a limo after bragging about having a limo, and then realizing he didn't have one. Ric Flair paid a random teenager in Charlotte $25 a night to drive him around and called him his driver. That's not in the documentary either, by the way. Ric Flair told the audience that afterwards in the Q&A in Atlanta. Ric Flair can't even tell all of Ric Flair's stories at once. 3. The witnesses detailing this include a legendary roster of wrestlers and friends, sure, but the principal witness, and most damaging one, is Ric Flair himself. He is situated front and center, interviewed by director Roy Karpf sitting just off camera. Flair looks like someone who treated his body brutally, but honestly, given what wrestling for 40 years while drinking heavily could do to a person, Flair, on the outside, at least, looks great. 4. He starts to look even better when he talks about what being Ric Flair entailed, at least 10 drinks a day, to start, along with wrestling 2 or 3 times a night for years on end, the aforementioned random plane crashes and other perks of constant travel, all while somehow staying in wrestling shape year-round. Despite attempting to destroy himself with prejudice in his prime, and well beyond it, the documentary brings in heavy hitters and bit players in wrestling to all acknowledge the same thing. For most of his career, Ric Flair was a brilliant technical wrestler who made everyone around him better. 5. That part might be the most comfortably compelling part of the entire documentary. A genuinely humble-seeming Hulk Hogan shows up just to admit he could only wrestle 4 kinds of short matches, while in comparison Flair could go full bore for an hour in any scenario you liked. Ricky Steamboat talks about Flair's unreal stamina and the brutal workouts they endured as rookie trainees in Vern Gainey's wrestling camps. The Undertaker not only talks, but thoughtfully and approvingly breaks down Flair's technique in the ring. That's not surprising to anyone who knows Mark Calloway outside of the ring, but is still jarring for the casual viewer used to only seeing his face rise ominously out of a coffin or glowering from under a hat. The file footage backs it up brilliantly, too. When Sting laughs and says Ric Flair was the biggest whiner in the ring ever, there's a fantastic cut to scenes of Flair operatically flying to the mat, pleading to the referee, and taking a theatrical beating from Sting. There's also the follow-up by Sting, that as a young wrestler, Sting wasn't owed any of that. Yet Flair went out of his way to coach up-and-coming wrestlers in the ring, and sold their moves with complete commitment to the bit, all out of a real generosity he showed to his partners in the ring. If anything in a story about wrestling is real, it's that. Flair, at least in the ring, appears as the most caring, charismatic, and giving man who ever eye-gouged someone in a loser-leaves-town match. 6. The rest of his life is the expected disaster, maybe more so than expected. Actually, there are all of those interviews and file footage, but most of Nature Boy is told by Flair himself, in his own words. Note, not told by Richard Flairs, but Ric Flair. According to Flair, the guy with his birth name was some guy who couldn't last 1 year at the University of Minnesota. The interviews with his first wife, Leslie Goodman, are particularly haunting for that switch. At some point after the plane crash in North Carolina, the persona of Ric Flair took over, and Richard Flairs ceased to exist. 7. It would be possible to watch the entire documentary and take it as a standard sports dramatic cycle of rise, success, fall, tragedy, redemption. That could be done, if you wanted to watch it that way. There is a fantastic segment about Flair's rivalry and in-the-ring creative partnership with Dusty Rhodes. There are all the stories of Flair's drinking and profligacy and his distant relationship with his parents, who according to Flair saw him wrestle a total of 3 times in his life. There is, with some careful editing, the redemption of Flair's failure as a father with his son, Reed, through his daughter Charlotte's entry into professional wrestling. 8. Nature Boy can go that way, if you wanted to. It's also possible to see Flair slowly sink into the horror of his later career and demolished personal life and see a person so devoured by his onstage persona that he never recovered. Seeing Flair talk about his son Reed, who overdosed at the age of 25 trying to start a professional wrestling career like his father, is excruciating. It's also made excruciatingly clear that Ric Flair had no ability whatsoever to parent his children, much less deal with their problems when they became adults and needed real help. The attention to detail and generosity in the ring translated to outright negligence outside it. 9. Worse, by the time all 90 minutes of Nature Boy rolls by, it's clear that there really is no difference between the in-ring character and the man. It's not that the tears aren't sincere, it's that at every point in the interviews with Flair, even the most emotional, vulnerable points, it feels like Ric Flair is selling. It's genuine, but it's the kind of genuine you get from someone with an over-practiced, stage-ready genuine. At the end, Nature Boy has Flair holding his daughter's hand up in triumph in the ring after Charlotte wins her first WWE title. The scene is heart-rending. He's clearly a proud father, but also Ric Flair basking in the role of being Ric Flair in the spotlight. 10. The most moving scene in the documentary, appropriately enough, involves his other family, wrestlers. More specifically, it involves wrestler Shawn Michaels, chosen to retire Flair in a career-threatening match at WrestleMania 24. Present-day Michaels is interviewed for the segment. He sounds little like his in-ring persona, and openly mourns for what Flair had become, a wrestler who stayed too long, gave almost everything to their business, and let whatever was left leave with his alter ego. For Michaels, Ric Flair went from an idol to a warning. Then Nature Boy lets the scene roll, the retirement match, after nearly 30 minutes of classic Flair struggle, ending with Flair eye-poking Michaels, nearly pulling off the pin out of nowhere, then taking a massive counter hit and staggering in the ring waiting to be finished. Michaels plays the role of remorseful finisher to the hilt, even pulling a move before it starts, too overcome to end a legend's career. Michaels then says "I'm sorry, I love you," and ends the match with a pin, a post-match kiss on the forehead, and a grief-stricken retreat from the ring. 11. That's probably Ric Flair's fault, too. With no separation between the ring and real life, Ric Flair and Nature Boy is never off-duty. Everything is a sell, or a work. It's bad enough when his ex-wife or his son says as much. It is much, much worse when the bulk of the evidence comes from the man himself through on-camera interviews. Flair happily admits to the excess of Ric Flair being completely real, but also shows no ability to introspect and consider why it all happened in the first place. Karpf tries gamely and repeatedly to get Flair to talk about his chilly relationship with his parents. He gets nothing. The overwhelming sense is not that he's stonewalling, but that after years of embracing the act there might not be anything back there anymore. 13. This wasn't in the movie, either. After the screening I attended in Atlanta there was a Q&A with Flair, where he talked about the aforementioned spaghetti incident, how he got drunk after a match in Philadelphia, went to dinner, screamed "I got 11 of these" at the table and threw his $30,000 Rolex watch into a plate of spaghetti. The next morning, he had to go through the trash trying to find it. This is also when he told us about the time lightning struck his umbrella while he was getting off a plane in Charlotte in 1983, bounced to the man behind him in line, and killed that man. He explained neither of these, and then offered to buy everyone drinks next door. 12. TL, Doctor, it would be very hard to write a wrestling version of Sunset Boulevard and not cast Ric Flair as Norma Desmond. Nature Boy's biggest fault is being too short to encompass the extravagant, rhinestone-dotted plane crash that Ric Flair's life evidently was and still is. But after 90 minutes you get the point. Ric Flair was ready for his close-up, and after 90 sometimes hilarious minutes of looking at it, the face looking back after a lifetime of hard-lived wheelin', dealin', and kiss-stealin' can be a terrifyingly empty one. 13. In conclusion, say it with me in a sad, low Ric Flair voice after considering the impermanence of humanity's greatness, and the hollowness of fame writ large on a single man rendered incapable of taking care of the ones he loves through ego-driven self-deletion and alcoholism. Woo-oo-oo-oo-oo-oo-oo.